Chapter 10. Energy Psychology. The fountain of content must spring up in the mind, and he who hath so little knowledge of human nature as to seek happiness by changing anything but his own disposition will waste his life in fruitless efforts, and multiply the grief he proposes to remove. Samuel Johnson, Elizabethan lexicographer. Michelle, a bright, perky 21-year-old woman, arrived in my office complaining of severe bladder pain. She had to urinate frequently and urgently. I did a complete medical workup, but could find nothing out of the ordinary. By the standards of my profession, there was nothing wrong with Michelle. Yet it was clear to me that Michelle's pain was real, and her physical symptoms were real. After I had finished looking in her bladder with a stethoscope and found everything to be normal, I ventured, "Sometimes women with your symptoms have a history of sexual abuse or molestation. Is this possible with you?" In the corner of her eye, the slightest of tears welled up. It turned out that Michelle had been sexually penetrated by an uncle almost daily from the age of 3 until she was 10 years old. I asked Michelle to think back on these memories and find a part of her body where they were strongest. She said she could feel them acutely in her lower abdomen and pelvis. And I asked her to rate them on a scale of 1 to 10, and with 1 being the mildest and 10 being the most intense. Michelle rated her feelings at 10 out of a possible 10. I then spent 45 minutes working with Michelle using some simple yet powerful emotional release techniques. I then asked her to rate her level of discomfort. It was a 1. Complete peace. I urged her to cast around in her body for the remnants of any of the disturbed feelings that she had previously felt. She could not find them, no matter how hard she tried. The emotionally charged memories had been so thoroughly released that a physical shift had occurred in her body. Her bladder condition disappeared. In the 3 years since that office visit, it has never returned. Eric Robbins, M.D., who tells this story in The Heart of Healing, is a urologist at Kaiser Permanente in San Diego, California. He is trained in several energy psychology techniques, powerful therapies that apply the principles of electromagnetic fields to medicine. All work with the body's electromagnetic signaling system to produce healing in the emotions and cells directly and quickly, without the need for extended courses of therapy, and sometimes without even needing to identify the traumas that caused the disturbance. As biologist James Oschman explains, stored trauma can be resolved as quickly as it was set in place. The body is continuously poised to resolve these afflictions and all of the psychological and emotional imbalances they create. This process goes to the deep, energetic level that organizes or incarnates or underlies conscious experience itself. When this happens, the patient may suddenly know that the issue or discomfort will not bother them again. The first of these energy psychology techniques to be developed was thought field therapy, TFT, and the most widely used is emotional freedom techniques, EFT. Others include the Tapas acupressure technique, TAT, and WHEE, holistic hybrid derived from EMDR and EFT. These therapies have demonstrated the ability to heal in very short periods of time. psychological conditions that can take many months or years with conventional psychiatry and psychotherapy, if indeed they can be healed at all. Emotional freedom techniques, EFT, used by several million people worldwide, including therapists, nurses, and doctors, is the most popular form of energy psychology. EFT was developed by Stanford-trained engineer Gary Craig in the 1990s. After studying the existing methods, especially the thought field therapy, he set out to find the simplest possible protocol for applying them, and the result was EFT. EFT consists of a simple routine. It starts with an affirmation. Even though I have blank this problem, I fully and completely accept myself. While saying this, the person taps a specific acupressure point with the tips of the fingers. 13 other acupressure meridian endpoints are then tapped 5 or more times by the participant with their fingertips, while a reminder phrase is spoken to keep the problem in mind. The whole procedure takes about 30 seconds, although it does not require a therapist and can be self-administered. Finding the root issues prior to tapping takes experience and training. The basics, however, are easily learned by anyone and can be applied to an impressive list of issues. In Gary Craig's words, a dedicated 12-year-old can achieve a 50% success ratio, even with problems that often stump doctors and conventional psychotherapists. Truly skilled practitioners often achieve 90%. EFT includes a self-assessment system that the subject can use before and then after the session to determine whether the problem has been cleared or whether further work is required. In a study of EFT published in the Journal of Clinical Psychology in 2003, Stephen Wells, Ph.D., and his fellow researchers performed a controlled experiment to find out whether EFT could assist people with phobias. The subjects of the study had all been clinically diagnosed as having a phobia to small animals such as spiders, snakes, bats, and mice. The researchers used several different measures of the strength of the participants' phobia before and after the study. They measured the pulse to see the extent which it rose when the individual contemplated the feared object. They measured the number of steps toward the feared animal a participant could take. They gave participants written stress questionnaires. Subjects in the experimental group received a 30-minute explanation of the method, which included one brief session of EFT. The subjects were then put through the same tests, and the results were remarkable. On every measure, the subjects' fear dropped dramatically, and some were able to walk right up to the very animals that before had triggered crippling phobias. Not only were the results of EFT dramatic at the time, but in a follow-up study 6 months later, the subjects still had a much lower rate of phobic reaction to the objects of their fear. Stephen Wells recounts the following story. One of the ladies in the study was so afraid of mice that if she saw a mouse or a rat, or even thought there was a mouse in the house, she would spend the night sleeping in her car. Needless to say, during pre-testing, she was unable to even enter the room with the mouse. After treatment, she was able to go right up to the mouse in the container without fear. Meanwhile, not long after the treatment, her daughter bought her granddaughter a pet rat as a present. A television station recording a program on our research went to this lady's house and took some footage of her. She was cradling the rat and saying that they aren't such bad creatures after all. There were many similar examples of people who also couldn't enter the room, who after just 30 minutes of EFT treatment were able to not only open the door but go right up to the creature that would previously have caused them to run from the room. One of these, a lady with a cockroach phobia, felt that her phobia had been holding her back in many areas of her life. Following 30 minutes of an EFT treatment, after which she went straight into the room and picked up the cockroach in the jar to examine it closely. She reported a huge shift in self-esteem and confidence that permeated all parts of her life. Stephen Wells' study was later replicated and extended by another research team led by Harvey Baker of New York's Queens College, leading further credibility to the results. And the pilot for a new movie being filmed by the producers of the hit movie The Secret captures footage of similar scenes. In one shot, a woman with a lifetime fear of cockroaches panics and screams uncontrollably when her attention is drawn to a fake cockroach. Then, after a brief EFT treatment, she's able to calmly handle a jar containing a live cockroach. When I first heard of the results being obtained through EFT, I dismissed them as hyperbole. I simply could not believe in such rapid change. However, after having tried the technique myself on some mental conditions on which other approaches like meditation were having no impact, I was impressed with the immediate changes that I experienced. After learning more about the technique from Gary Craig, the originator of EFT, and witnessing the spectacular and immediate results reported by his subjects, I began to apply it with other people. Though the routine is very simple, applying it effectively to sufferers from long-term psychological trauma requires a deep understanding of its application and limitations, and severe traumatic stresses are best uncorked in the office of a trained energy therapist. The mind-body-spirit connection can be seen in the movements of people under stress. They often touch or tap or rub certain parts of their bodies. Examples include rubbing the temples on either side of the eyes, putting a hand to the mouth with fingers touching the skin above the upper lip and below the lower lip, raising a hand to the heart area, wringing the hands, fidgeting with the fingernails with the opposite hand, resting the head on a hand supporting the bridge of the nose. And it turns out that specific areas of the body, when tapped or rubbed, release stress, and that most are on the endpoints of acupuncture meridians. But when they are all tapped or rubbed in turn, the stress reduction effect is amplified. Energy psychology takes these acupoints out of the realm of unconscious self-interventions and systematizes the conscious use of these points into an organized stress reduction routine. Once memorized, the routine can be used for reducing or eliminating stress whenever it occurs, and even for releasing stress that has long been buried in your muscles or your subconscious mind. There's a medieval Sufi trickster called the Mullah Nasruddin, and many whimsical tales are told of his exploits. Nasruddin was a smuggler, and every day he would cross the Egyptian border with his camel. The border guard, knowing his unsavory reputation, would search him thoroughly. Day after day, the guard would go over every inch of Nasruddin and give his camel the same treatment. But the guard never found an ounce of contraband. Many years later, when they were both old men, the guard ran into Nasruddin in a bazaar. "I no longer have the power to arrest you," he said, "but I must know before I die What were you smuggling that eluded my sharp eyes?" "Camels," said Nasrudin. These stress reduction points are like Nasrudin's camels. They're so obvious that we don't notice them. But once you're alert, you cannot walk down the street without seeing people touching these spots. Until now, psychologists and biologists have had little idea that these common gestures are part of our intrinsic response to stress. Researchers study energy psychology. In a study published in Counseling and Clinical Psychology Journal, psychologist Jack Rowe, Ph.D. of Texas A&M University's Psychology and Sociology Department, tested people for stress before and after EFT. He administered standardized tests for measuring stress, called the SA-45, to 102 people, before, during, and after an EFT workshop with Gary Craig. Rowe measured their stress levels 1 month before the workshop, when the workshop started, when it ended, 1 month after the workshop, and 6 months later. He found that the stress levels of participants decreased significantly between the beginning and the end of the workshop. But even more promising was the finding that the effect endured, and that when subjects were retested 6 months later, their stress levels remained much lower than they had been before the event. Such was the strength of the results that there was less than 1 chance in 2,000 that such results could have occurred through chance. Another pilot study of EFT examined its effects on patients about to undergo dental surgery. Research confirms that about 1 in 3 people experience moderate to severe anxiety when confronted with dental treatment. After EFT, 100% of patients in the study reported a decrease in anxiety. Another study examined the EEG patterns of claustrophobic patients when they were confined in a small, metal-lined enclosure similar to an elevator, and compared them with a control group. It found that they had high concentration of theta waves, as well as getting high scores on an anxiety test. After a TFT treatment, their brainwave profile returned to the same level of theta activity as the non-claustrophobic subjects, and their scores on the anxiety test also dropped. 2 weeks later, the results of the experiment still held steady. Another studied the effects of acupressure on subjects who had received a minor injury that required paramedics to transport them to hospital. Those who had received acupressure showed a significantly greater reduction in anxiety, pain, and heart rate than those who had not. A group of patients who had a fear of needles so strong that they were unable to receive necessary treatment went through a 1-hour TFT treatment. They showed a significant improvement and retained it when followed up a month later. Another researcher examined a group of 48 people with public speaking fears. After TFT, their anxiety decreased significantly, while a control group did not. When the control group was then given TFT, they showed the same improvement. Several studies of test anxiety have been done, measuring student performance before and after they learned EFT. Students show large drops in anxiety as well as improvements in test scores. In 2008, the prestigious peer-reviewed journal Psychotherapy published a survey of the published studies of energy psychology. A noteworthy feature of the review was how dramatically these therapies improve many different psychological problems, including depression, anxiety, phobias, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Researchers are beginning to understand not just that they work, but how they work. One possibility is that tapping creates a piezoelectric charge that travels through the connective tissue along the path of least electrical resistance. When a traumatic memory is recalled, along with awareness of the site in the body that holds the primary memory of the trauma, tapping introduces a message of safety to the body that is not congruent with the emotionally arousing memory. So while your mind is sending a message of danger, your body is getting a conflicting message of safety. This decouples the memory from the fight or flight response. After all, you wouldn't be tapping if you were being chased by a tiger. The immediate early genes that regulate stress are expressed, and the body becomes calm again. The intensity of physical feeling at the site on the body diminishes, discharging the emotional intensity related to the trauma. In one experiment, the brain scans of subjects suffering from generalized anxiety disorder were examined. Conditions such as anxiety and depression can be distinguished by specific brain frequency patterns. Anxiety has one such electronic signature. Depression has another. According to David Feinstein, Ph.D., co-author of The Promise of Energy Psychology, which describes this study in fascinating detail. Digitized EEG readings of subjects' brain scans were taken before treatment began. They then received 12 energy treatment sessions, and a second EEG was taken. The group receiving energy psychology treatment was compared to a group receiving the gold standard in experimentally validated talk therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. It also compared them with patients receiving medication. The patients were interviewed 3, 6, and 12 months after treatment to determine whether the therapy had produced lasting results. The EEG readouts demonstrated the regions of their brains that were functioning normally, those with various degrees of dysfunction. The accompanying illustration indicates the progress made by those subjects that received energy psychology. It shows that before treatment began, most areas of their brain revealed high or very high levels of dysfunctionality. Only a small portion of their frontal lobes showed normal or slightly dysfunctional patterning. Yet, after 12 sessions of energy treatments, as can be seen on the right bottom scan, most areas were normal or close to normal. Patients given CBT had similar results, but more sessions were required to accomplish those changes, and the results were not as durable on a 1-year follow-up as were the energy psychology treatments. As Oshman notes, citing the findings of William M. Redpath, no matter how well patients recalled critical memories, the patterns of their lives continued to be tormented and disrupted. The most difficult issues must be resolved by the organism itself. In the patients given drugs, the brain wave ratios did not change, suggesting that the medication suppressed the symptoms without addressing the underlying wave frequency imbalances. Undesirable side effects were reported. Symptoms tended to return after the medication was discontinued, and when symptoms are suppressed, the patient may act and feel more normal, but the underlying brain rhythms remain unaffected. Antidepressant drugs are masking their symptoms without removing them, and this is like taking a painkiller when you have a broken arm. You might feel better, but your underlying condition remains unchanged. As Shakespeare said, "It doth but skin and film the ulcerous place, whilst rank corruption, mining all within, infects unseen." Energy cures for physical traumas. Besides working well on psychological traumas, EFT has established a surprising track record of effectiveness in shifting or even curing physical ailments. This is because there's virtually always an emotional component to a physical disease. Cancer patients, for instance, are often psychologically depressed. Along with the depression of their immune system that accompanies chemotherapy, psychological depression left untreated often contributes to organic disease, even if a patient has a disease that seems purely organic, such as an acute bacterial infection. Releasing any possible emotional stressors cannot hurt. I have been surprised to find that even colds and flu are sometimes ameliorated or prevented by EFT. The following story illustrates the healing of a physical ailment after using EFT. A woman who had suffered from carpal tunnel syndrome for about 8 years received some training in EFT. After having had extensive chiropractic and physical therapy treatment, she thought she was about as healed as she was going to be without surgery. Even though she felt better in general, the chronic pain still wore her down occasionally. After being introduced to EFT and being guided through a tapping sequence for almost 10 minutes, she had absolutely no pain. She reports, "I couldn't believe it. I kept mentally searching throughout my body for the pain, and it just wasn't there. I had actually taken a few minutes to tap on the corner of my eye, my hand, and other simple, easy-to-do places on my body, and had shed this pain with which I thought I was destined to live." Next, she applied it to grief that had burdened her for many years. Within minutes, she recounts, "I felt the weight lift from me. I have been able to remember my sister fondly and nostalgically, but with no pain of grief ever since." I have seen the same results from EFT time and time again. While writing this chapter, a friend of mine, who graciously tends my garden, came in sniffling. "I have allergies," she explained. "What's the worst?" I inquired. "Grass seed," she said without hesitation. A couple of minutes after I asked her to intensify the feeling, she frowned and said she had a headache. The allergy and headache was a 7 on a scale of 10, she said, and her nose was so clogged that she sounded stifled. I did an EFT tapping routine on her, and she said she was a 0. I ran out the door, cut a few stalks of flowering grass, came back in, and presented her with the bouquet as a humorous tribute to healing. While she held them, I did another tapping routine. Then I asked her how she felt on a scale of 0 to 10. "I'm a 0, she said. Her eyes opened wide at the realization, but the sound of her voice showed that more than her eyes had opened. Her nasal passages didn't sound at all clogged as she spoke. She sat on the chair for a while longer, dazed, and clutching the paradoxical bouquet in amazement. In the words of a leading researcher, what is at work in these cases is they allow for organized or non-chaotic energy to spread suddenly throughout the organism to create new structures, functions, and order. This concept is important, as a frequent observation of practitioners of energy psychology, bodywork, energetic, and movement therapies is a sudden and beneficial sea change or phase change spreading throughout the organism. As trauma or other disorder is resolved, and the whole body reintegrates accordingly. One doctor examined her patient's live red blood cells using dark field microscopy before and after the patient used EFT. The doctor was worried about the degree of clumping found in the patient's blood sample, since when red blood cells clump together, they present less surface area to absorb oxygen from the lungs and distribute it throughout the body. An even distribution of red blood cells indicates a healthy ability for oxygen absorption, while clumping indicates decreased oxygen uptake. She found that the patient could alter the degree of clumping of her red blood corpuscles by doing EFT, and that the effect showed up immediately when the samples of live cells were examined under a microscope. The top photo in the accompanying pair shows the patient's red blood cells clumping up before EFT to release them. The bottom photo, taken 12 minutes later, shows the patient's red blood cells after 2 rounds of EFT done with the conscious intent of producing even distribution of cells. Our dominant medical model does not believe that physiological processes such as red blood cells clumping are under the control of a patient's conscious mind. Reversing red blood cell clumping usually takes months of treatment, if it can be accomplished at all. Yet in this case, 2 rounds of EFT, lasting just a few minutes, were enough to produce an immediate and visible change in the degree of cell clumping. Stories such as this provide promising pointers for future controlled experiments on the effects people can produce in their bodies using EFT. The EFT website contains stories by hundreds of doctors, psychiatrists, psychotherapists, sports coaches, social workers, and other health professionals of ways in which they have found it useful, and of patients who have responded to EFT after conventional interventions had failed. The EFT Manual by Gary Craig contains the basic instructions for EFT. There are also books for specific problems, such as EFT for back pain and EFT for fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue. EFT and other energy psychology therapies may be giving us quick access to the realm of quantum healing and promise to shorten dramatically the time taken to heal psychological traumas. To professionals accustomed to lengthy courses of psychotherapy or to resorting to drug therapies, they seem like miracles. In their book, The Promise of Energy Psychology, authors David Feinstein and Donna Eden and Gary Craig list some of the conditions that have been improved by EFT. Performance fears for a 19-year-old gymnast, flashbacks and insomnia a woman was experiencing following 2 automobile accidents during a 6-week period, a refinery worker stopping smoking after 35 years, a woman's extreme anxiety prior to bladder surgery, a 6-year-old girl's psychosomatic pains, a mother's fear of flying that was being communicated to her 1-year-old daughter, depression suffered by a single mom with 2 teenage daughters, a woman's intense lifelong craving for chocolate and ice cream, a 13-year-old boy's fear of the dark, a boy with an intense allergic reaction to horses, another boy with severe dyslexia, a woman's pain after reconstructive surgery for a damaged knee. Reports found on the www.emofree.com site suggest that basic tapping methods have resulted in improvement in headaches, back pain, stiff neck and shoulders, joint pains, cancer, chronic fatigue syndrome, lupus, ulcerative colitis, psoriasis, asthma, allergies, itching eyes, body sores, rashes, insomnia, constipation, irritable bowel syndrome, eyesight, muscle tightness, bee stings, urination problems, morning sickness, PMS, sexual dysfunction, sweating, poor coordination, carpal tunnel syndrome, arthritis, numbness in the fingers, stomach aches, toothaches, trembling, and multiple sclerosis, among many other physical conditions. And this is not to suggest that the basic recipe replaces medical care, but it is interesting that an approach designed to address emotional problems is so frequently reported as helping with physical problems as well. Ever quicker interventions. Psychiatrist Daniel Benor, MD, is one of the pioneers of mind-body therapy. In the early 1980s, he was the first person to compile a comprehensive database of research studies supporting noetic interventions. He has developed a hybrid form of meridian therapy, drawing on the same principles that underlie EFT and EMDR. He calls his technique WHEE, holistic hybrid derived from EMDR and EFT. WHEE takes less time than EFT. In case your life is so fast-paced that the 30 seconds required for an EF routine seems like an eternity to you. You begin a WHEE intervention by thinking about the issue or while you're in the middle of a stressful situation. You then assess yourself on a scale of 0 to 10, with 0 being completely calm and 10 being fit to be tied. You can also focus on the location in your body where the feeling is most intense. You begin with an affirmation similar to the one you might use for EFT, such as, even though I feel, example, dreadful when I think of Barbara hitting me, I love myself wholly and completely, and God loves me wholly and completely and unconditionally. You then alternate tapping the two sides of your body in some manner. You can tap the insides of your eyebrows where they join the bridge of your nose or the edges of your eyes. And if you feel resistance doing the exercise, rub just below the collarbone center point to release it. You can also squeeze your toes. First, you squeeze your left big toe down against the ground, and then your right big toe down, and so on. You then anchor a positive affirmation while continuing the alternate tapping. Think about a benefit from the situation like, I'm safe now. I've connected with some wonderful people. I've learned to ask for help. I've learned boundaries. You then assess yourself again on a scale from 0 to 10 and repeat the alternate tapping procedure. If you don't feel considerably better, the routine takes around 10 seconds. Covert relief. Beyond its speed, however, WHEE has the benefit of not looking obvious. When you're in the courtroom, in the middle of a divorce trial, when you're in a meeting with a boss, when you're on a hot date, and when you're gearing up for a television appearance, when you're in the middle of a fight with your spouse, or when you're on the sports field playing in front of thousands of spectators. You can't call a timeout and start tapping your temples and rolling your eyes without danger of arrest, and that's where WHEE comes in. You certainly can tap your toes without looking like anything other than the impatient person you probably are. A population with whom Daniel Benor has had great success is young people who are locked up in juvenile hall. He says that teenagers usually refuse to use tapping outside of his office for fear of embarrassment. They can't risk looking ridiculous in front of their peers. He has therefore developed ways in which they can reduce their tempers and their triggering with WHEE without anyone around them noticing. Besides tapping the toes, he has experimented with tapping alternate sides of your teeth with your tongue, and other subtle alternating points. The potential for diffusing dangerous conflicts by these fast and easily learned techniques is substantial. The following case history is a composite history drawn from Dr. Benor's website. 6-year-old Joe had been seriously abused emotionally, physically, and sexually by his mother from at least the age of 2 and probably earlier. He was removed from her home at age 4 and had 9 foster home placements before his latest foster mother suggested to the welfare worker that counseling might be helpful to help him for his temper outbursts. Fighting children in his first grade class and after school, inability to fall asleep till past midnight, frequent nightmares and night terrors, and bedwetting. His more serious problems, in addition, he was unable to sit still, was impulsive and distractible, constantly forgetting and losing things, and had no friends. I diagnosed PTSD, moderately severe, and possible attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. I prescribed small doses of Ritalin, as this acts within minutes and, if effective, could provide rapid relief for some of his problems. He responded well to the medication and was much better able to sit and attend in class, less impulsive and less forgetful. His other symptoms remained. He also had counseling sessions weekly with a social worker at the clinic where I work, focused on issues of relating to his new family, multiple losses, and the PTSD issues. At the initial interview, I taught Joe and his foster mother to use the butterfly hug, crossing both arms over the chest, hands draped over the front of the opposing bicep. Joe chose an affirmation about one of the bad memories that he had of being left in the dark cellar by his birth mother. He was unable to count, so I had him show me a visual analog scale, the VAS equivalent of a SUDS, with the gap between his hands representing how big his bad feeling was when he thought about being in the dark cellar. He opened his arms wide and said, "I can't reach to show you how big the bad feeling is." Within minutes of using the butterfly hug, his hands were touching in the VAS. He had reduced the bad feelings to 0. Over the next several weeks, Joe, with the help of his mother, used the butterfly hug daily on various fears, difficulty falling asleep, and nightmares, as well as to calm down after he had temper outbursts. Within 2 months, Joe was functioning at near normal levels of behavior in school and at home. Counseling continued for another 4 months and was discontinued. I have followed him for Ritalin prescriptions for 2 years, and we have all been pleased with his excellent academic progress in school, and with his good behavior and improved social adjustments in school and at home. Tapping works with babies as well as older children, according to experienced clinicians. Roberta Teams, PhD, reports, "I've seen babies stop crying in mid-sob when the tapping begins." In an informal experiment in a daycare center in New Jersey, I observed one group of nannies lift crying babies to their laps and speak soothingly to them, while other nannies lifted their babies, soothed them with words, and also tapped. The latter group all stopped crying. A group of 12 psychologists was interviewed about their use of energy psychology with the survivors of childhood sexual abuse. They considered energy psychology to be the most effective treatment available for anxiety and panic, and they reported many improvements. One described their common experience in these words: "My life and work have been enriched beyond measure. I have been able to help people in ways I never imagined possible. The speed and depth of change can be astonishing. Energy psychology and other soft disciplines could someday make much hard medicine unnecessary, providing the scientific underpinning for pharmaceutical-free energy medicine. Changing the beliefs below the symptoms. PSYCH-K is a technique developed by therapist Rob Williams that determines which beliefs are held in your subconscious mind and then shifts them. Participants troll through lists of beliefs that are embedded in their belief structure, such as, I give myself permission to do what I love. It's okay for others to disagree with me. I am able to function independently of others. It's easy for me to receive love from others. I experience the presence of God within me. Money is my friend. My body heals itself naturally and quickly. It is safe, fun, and easy for me to be slim and healthy. Rather than focusing on conscious beliefs, everyone believes they want to be wealthy. For instance, even people who never actualize wealth. Williams tests the strength of the person's muscles when they make a statement. If a muscle tests weak, Williams believes that our subconscious minds don't believe it, even though our conscious minds do. If our muscles test strong, it indicates congruence between the conscious statement and the unconscious belief. The beliefs for which Rob Williams tests are in 6 areas challenging to most people: health in the body, prosperity, relationships, self-esteem, personal power, and spirituality. As they run through the lists, participants notice the statements for which their muscles test weak and then work with them using Psych-K's somatic healing tools. Once a negative belief has been healed, the person will test strong when confronted with its positive counterpart. For instance, I tested strong for most of the 25 beliefs about money and prosperity, but I tested weak for 2. I can afford to take time off to rest and nurture myself whenever I need to. And money is one expression of my spirituality and my love for God, myself, and others. I knew before the test that those 2 statements would render me weak. My whole body felt weaker simply reading the statements. I hadn't considered that money could actually be an expression of my love for God, and I often get impatient with my needs for self-nurturance. When I see so much suffering in the world, and I can play a small part in alleviating it, the list of beliefs allowed me to pinpoint exactly where my energy was not flowing. It showed me the beliefs I held that were subtly anchoring me to unhealthy habits and physical conditions. For one of the exercises on the first day of the seminar, I partnered with a woman who came in on crutches. She'd suffered for 15 years, she told me, from a debilitating neurological condition that arose after she was injured in a car accident. Her broken bones had healed, but the pain was so intense that she took large doses of painkillers 3 times a day and one at night to allow her to sleep. She had been on this high dosage of painkillers for every day of the past 15 years. On the final day, as people were walking around saying goodbye, giving each other hugs, I noticed she was not hobbling around on her crutches. And she told me that she felt fine, and that she had felt so good the previous evening that she had forgotten to take her nightly medication. She woke up feeling even better, and had not taken painkillers the entire day. It was now 24 hours since her last dose, and she left the crutches in her room. There are hundreds of such stories in the world of Psych-K. A former president of the Colorado Association of Psychotherapists wrote, "Psych-K is clearly the most amazing tool for effective personal change that I have ever encountered. Other testimonials report cessation from various fears and phobias, allergies, depression, weight problems, and a variety of organic diseases. As easy as TAT, an easily learned technique that can be applied to a wide variety of anxieties and traumas, is TAT, or Tapas Acupressure Technique. Named after its founder, Tapas Fleming, in TAT, you place 3 fingers of either hand on the front of your face and the flat of your other hand at the base of your skull. You touch the ring finger to the thumb, then place the tips of both fingers on the inside edges of the eyes on either side of the bridge of the nose. There's no need to pinch or apply pressure. The long finger is then placed gently on the forehead. The other hand goes flat on the back of your head, on the bony protuberance where the skull terminates. You hold this pose while you think of the worst part of the problem that's bothering you, and wait till you feel a physical shift. It usually happens in a minute or 2, rarely longer than 5. You feel your body relax as the tension drains from you. Then, while holding the position, you review all the aspects of the traumatic incident in a series of 9 steps. Like, all the origins of this problem are now healed, or everything that led up to this situation happened, but now it's over, and it's no longer resulting in pain. Or, all the sources of this problem, in my mind, body, heart, life, and all other dimensions of my being are healed now, each time you wait to feel a physical shift, such as a deep breath or shoulder tension dropping. At a tutorial I did with Tapas Fleming, one of the questions an audience member asked her was instructive. "Isn't it healthy to process emotion?" she asked. "Isn't there value to getting to the roots of the problem through processing and stay with that process till it's resolved?" Now, this question might be asked of all energy psychologies because they abort the usual long process of psychological inquiry so familiar to psychotherapists and go straight to the healing. Fleming's point of view was intriguing. "You don't have to process emotion," she responded. "Emotion comes from a particular place in the psyche, a particular energy system. When you become that identity, you're going to feel the associated emotion. But that emotion resides in that identity continually. If you travel there, its typical emotions will pour out of you as long as you stay there. If you travel someplace else, you no longer have to process the emotions that exist in that energy system." This perspective runs counter to modern psychotherapy, which gives great weight to the narrative of early childhood experience. In order to spot repetitive themes, once enough incidents have been described by a client, the therapist is able to find their commonalities. This big picture results in a diagnosis. Treatment often involves expressing the old, rediscovered emotions in a cathartic discharge. It may also attempt to install new behavior by interrupting habitual old behaviors with new thoughts. It is hoped that the recounting of traumatic memories, the recognition of persistent life patterns, and the insertion of new cognitions will change behavior. Energy psychology sees our self-destructive habits and behaviors as energy systems held in the body. It dispenses with meaning, theory, conceptualization, generalization, and diagnosis, and simply tries to make you feel better in your body, even though you still have the traumatic incidents in your past. It measures the degree to which you go into fight or flight when you remember the trauma on a 0 to 10 scale. As you tap and then remeasure, after a few minutes, people are typically able to recall even the most horrendous incidents of abuse without becoming emotionally triggered. When you start to put the scientific studies of energy psychology together with the thousands of case histories reported on the websites of practitioners, the outlines of a swift, safe, and effective new healing approach become apparent. A new generation of physicians and psychotherapists is coming of age. I expect an increasing number of them to understand the emotional roots of disease and to consider releasing the emotional charge of childhood traumas, an essential part of any treatment program.